If you are planning on retiring early, or you are nearing retirement soon, you may need to cover the early retirement gap. If you don't know what this is, or you want to learn how, keep listening to learn more. Welcome to the Money Meets Medicine podcast, where we talk all about the personal finance topics you wish you had learned in medical school. I'm your host, Justin Harvey, and here is your co-host, who once intubated a patient while at the beach, Dr. Jimmy Turner.
You know, I was trying to think about this before the show, Justin. Like my nickname at work is Dory, like the forgetful fish. I know I've definitely shared that on the show before because my memory is so bad. So I can't remember if I shared the story or not. For longtime listeners, if this is a repeat, it's a good story though. So maybe you can just hit like fast forward 30 seconds button. But yeah, so I was at the beach, and my family and I we go to the beach every year. And so this year we just happened to, be at a beach where there was like a field behind the house. Like there was a lot that could have a house on it, but it didn't. We were on the front row. And so I'm reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe to my kids. And we hear this ambulance go by, but it's going by pretty quickly. And so, I didn't really think anything of it. Definitely not enough time to get out to the porch and like let my son see, because he was all about ambulances at this age. And then a little while later, we hear a helicopter, and it's pretty loud. And so put on like my loafers. I'm like walking out there, right? I've got like my Wake Forest baseball shorts on and like a white t-shirt. I haven't shaved in like a year. And so like we're watching this thing, and this helicopter's landing, and it lands, and like it's taking a little bit of time, but we notice that the EMS truck is like over on the side. Like they're clearly, air vacuuming somebody. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm like, this is taking longer than it probably should. So I like walk down the stairs, go to the road. There's this person conducting traffic because, it's a typical beach, where there's like just that 1-2 lane road that goes all the way down the beach. And at least that's how it is in North Carolina. And so like, hey, look, I'm not sure if you need my help or not, but, I'm a physician. I'm happy to help if you need it. And he's like, well, actually having a tough time putting a breathing tube in on the back of the truck. And I said, well, I'm an anesthesiologist. I'm happy to help them do that. He's like, yeah, go to the back of the truck. Now, the reason I'm surprised by this a little bit is that there's this, and I can use his name on the show because he's actually in my book, but Paul Riker. So he's an anesthesiologist that trained at Wake like me, was on a run, saw EMS esophagally intubate a guy, like clearly was about to kill them. And so he stepped in with like his jogging clothes on, was like, hey, I'm a physician, like that tube is not in the right place. And like police like held him back. He got thrown in jail till they could confirm who he was. And it's like, I approach these situations pretty cautiously because of what happened to Paul. And I'm like, I literally look like a bum. I look like a beach bum. I got like athletic shorts on and a white t-shirt, and like, I'm just walking out of nowhere. Right. So I walk to the back of the truck, and I'm still being cautious. And I'm like, hey, same story. And this young EMS guy says what I expected the first time: we're good. I got it. I'm like, okay, buddy. And so I look in the back of the truck, and there's this guy with like, salt and pepper, like gray hair, and clearly lots of experience, the leader of the group. And I said, hey, sir, so, I'm about to walk away. I just want to let you know I'm an anesthesiologist. I can help you put that breathing tube in. This guy here is saying that you don't need my help, but I just wanted to confirm before I walk away. And he's like, please come save me. And so I get in the back of the truck, and I'm asking like, hey, what's the story? I need a Miller 2, I need a bougie. What happened? Looking at the vitals, getting the story. And they have this guy's like, just like plaster. I mean, like just that pink tape, like just tape all the way across his forehead, all the way across his chin, C-collar in place, like strapped down to the board. It's like the most immobilized neck, C-spine that I've ever seen in my life. And so end up, putting the tube in, find out they don't have entitled CO2. So for the people that have intubated patients, in codes or whatever, you're probably familiar with that. And so they don't have it. It like clotted off like the little tubing that they had because they tried intubating so many times on this patient. And so fortunately, really small guy, we confirm breath sounds. And so put the breathing tube in, and I was like, hey, like, what do I do next? And Air Care shows up, and now they're pissed because like they wanted to put the breathing tube in because this is, it's like a typical thing. Like there's like this pissing contest between like, different kinds of medical professionals. And so, anyway, after we confirmed the tube, like, yeah, can you help him get him on the chopper? And I was like, well, what do I need to know? And they're like, it's really loud. It's really hot. I was like, okay. And so I go underneath the chopper, like put this guy, and it is really loud, and it is really, really hot. And so like, I always wondered why, like in the summer, they would wear like these, like, like full, like jumpsuit things that like clearly were probably really hot to be in. And I found out why. And so we're walking back to my beach house, with the guy, the salt and pepper, EMS guy. And the guy that's conducting traffic's like, hey, did you guys get the breathing tube? And the salt and pepper's like, yeah, we did. The doc got it, but he cheated. He used a bougie. And so I just kind of patted him on the shoulder. I was like, that's called being prepared, my friend. And so, we kind of laughed about it, got the guy on the back of the truck. All's well that ends well. But it was quite the experience. And it was the only time I think that my family has ever kind of publicly seen what I do, and like walking back into the house and then being like, wow, like he's not like a fake doctor. Like he actually just helps somebody. Like it was actually this like really interesting experience just from like a family perspective. Cause like I just go to work and do things. They're not there, And so it was anyway, that's my 5 minutes into the show story about intubating a patient at the beach.
I wonder how much
So
in medical bills you saved that guy. That was before the No Surprises Act, where he would have gotten a bill because he had been intubated by the guy who flew there to intubate him. But you just swept the rug right out from under those guys.
no, maybe I should find him and send him a bill. I'm just kidding. I was just doing the right thing. This has happened on a few occasions. It drives my wife crazy. But she is still married to me. So speaking of really hot things, we're going to talk about, a little bit about FIRE, right? So, people are often enamored by this idea, like, oh, I want to retire early. I want to get to financial independence early. And they don't think about the back end. Like, okay, great. I love your plan. But when you get to financial independence, have you thought about the fact that you're going to, have to withdraw money potentially before the age at which the IRS is like, it's cool. And so we're going to talk about that on the show, the rule of 59 and a half, what that means. Before we do, just want to remind everybody, don't forget, if you want to download a free copy of the Physician Philosopher's Guide to Personal Finance, or if you're ending training or you're an attending physician that needs to get own occupation disability insurance, because in my opinion, all doctors do, make sure to visit moneymeetsmedicine.com where we can help you out with both of those things. And Justin, this show, there's just so many different ways we can go with this, but I'm curious, because you kind of have like this framework in terms of like case studies, but before we dive into it, right? 59 and a half, basically, if you withdraw money from your 401k, 403b, a variety of retirement accounts, you get assessed this like 10% early withdrawal penalty. And so people that are in early retirement or real close to it or planning for early retirement need to be aware of this thing. And I feel like it doesn't get enough airtime because people are like, no, let's just talk about financial independence and being, financially free from whatever we don't want to do anymore, and not enough time on like the nuts and bolts. So yeah, I think it's a really cool topic to talk about.
Yeah, I totally agree. And we're going to handle sort of the easier part of, the retirement discussion. The more difficult part, in my observation, is the sort of the identity part, or even the psychological shift that goes from piling up cash to drawing it down. Those are both very profound mental thresholds that people underestimate the challenge of crossing those thresholds. We're just going to talk about math and rules, which is relatively algorithmic and simple in comparison to the squishy, messy human psychology around retirement.
Yep.
So, from the financial planning side of things, there's this time between like age 50 and age 70 where it can look a lot of different ways. And we'll talk about a couple of those. But I'm assuming like age 50, you're basically working full time, but you're starting to think about not working full time. And at age 70, you're almost certainly retired or very close to it. You're also or you're at the age at which the Social Security benefit is maxed out. And it's right before the time when RMDs are going to kick in a couple of years later, required minimum distributions from your retirement account. So between that window, that 50 and 70, that 20-year window, there's a lot of different levers that we can pull in order to build the bridge, as the words that you used, to get you to a place where things, because, when you're in your 70s, by and large, your financial situation is it's just the output of whatever you've done for 7 decades before that. And it's relatively stable. And obviously it needs, there's things to optimize, but there are the huge moving parts have been largely kind of locked in. But prior to that, it's kind of the Wild West in terms of the options that you have. And it's an exciting time. I mean, this is like a really cool time to be doing planning in this window because of the cool and exciting stuff that you can do.
Yeah. So, maybe let's talk through like a few different ways to approach that 50 to 70 year period, right? So on prior show, one of my favorite shows, actually, discussing Coast Fire. We kind of talked about this idea of, saving up a good amount of money and then basically pulling the string back on that, and allowing you to potentially work less. Your money's still going to accumulate. I kind of view one of these scenarios like partial fire, where like you got this like slow glide path where you're like going from like 1.0 FTE to like zero point 0.9 to 0.8 to 0.7 to 0.5. And like as you're doing that, naturally, you're gonna be making less money. So you're gonna have to be drawing it from somewhere. But what it also does is allows you to not have to go cold turkey, which is one of the other models, and basically start relying on 100% of something else other than your income from medicine. So maybe as we talk through this, like the cold turkey model, the glide path model, or whatever you want to call it, and then maybe hey, you can actually still make some income from other things, like those three different things. So
Yeah.
which one do you want to start with?
Let's start with cold turkey. So,
Cold.
and it's interesting, Jimmy. I'm curious if you have observed this too. There's a little bit of a generational divide, I think, um, amongst, and maybe this breaks down too between like vocations, and maybe medicine is a little different than others. But I think physicians who are, the baby boomer crowd who are currently like 65 plus, it's more common in my observation for them to just retire. Um, than it is for, I feel like the Gen X, Gen Y, it's more common to be exposed to discussions around building your job in ways that are going to accommodate your life, and scaling FTE and locums, and thinking a little more creatively, constructively about how to build things. Yes, you want to say something?
Yeah. So I actually posted this on Twitter. I'm never. I can't say never. It's very hard for me to get to like X, like calling it X. It's weird. But Twitter is probably the social media platform that I frequent the most. So you can follow me on there for all sorts of random philosophical thoughts. But I was actually posting earlier today about, there's that baseball player, blanking on his name now. His name's Rendon, who basically came out and said like, hey, baseball is not my top priority. Like, my faith and my family are my top priority. Like, this is a job; it pays the bills. And it kind of reminded me of like the thing in medicine, right? So like people get really pissed. I remember when I started like venturing into the entrepreneurial space and like writing blog posts and talking about burnout and talking about like how this, the struggle is very real in medicine. And they were inevitably like Kevin MD, who, has a wide variety of people. They're not just physicians, but, lay people, other medical professionals, and getting grief from people that like, I mean, like really hateful things. Like, I would never want you to be my doctor because, this isn't your vocation, your calling, like your identity. And like, so when we talk about like these generational differences, right? And like, that's probably one of the biggest divides that I see is like people that, started their career expecting to like get the gold watch at the end of it and live off their pension because, like that's just who you were. And the job is where you're at. And like, it was, your top priority. So now these younger generations, my generation, let's call it Zennials, in between millennial and Generation X, being the tip of the spear and saying, hey, look, I want to be a really good doctor, but I also, for me, my identities, right? I want to be a good dad and a good husband too. Like, I'm not choosing between those three things. I want to be all three of them.
Yeah.
And so like it's so interesting seeing that happen, and then also seeing like public reaction to that process, and like this thought process that, like medicine can't be a job, it's got to be a vocation or a calling. And now these younger generations are like, yeah, I mean, I want to be good at it, don't get me wrong, I want to take really good care of people, but I also want to have whatever word we're using nowadays for balance. Right. And so like
Yeah.
I agree. Like it's fundamentally an identity thing. It's partially a financial thing. It's partially a, like I just want to not get destroyed by my career for 35 years thing. And so yeah, that's definitely something I've noticed too, in a different kind of way.
I have my own hypotheses about why I think that is. We can perhaps tackle it in another show. But I do think that doctors today get treated a certain kind of way, and corporate ownership of medicine continues to encroach and, frankly, like
Yep.
capitalize upon and take advantage of the the high moral standard that physicians bring to their
The
work.
altruism.
And yes, that's right. And doctors are like, why should I be enriching XYZ Incorporated and grinding myself in order to, you know, I, I I am sympathetic to that. Anyway, as it relates to the topic at hand of retirement and the cold turkey sort of proposition where, you're working and then you're going to quit. The bridge that you need to build is until some amount of reliable income kicks in. So if you quit when you're age 60, the soonest you can take Social Security is 62. Your full retirement age might be 66, and then the Social Security benefit will continue to grow until it's age 70. It grows at 8% per year. So the longer you can defer on taking Social Security, you get 8% per year guaranteed return as long as the US government doesn't go bankrupt. So the strategies that you're going to be thinking about as this 60-year-old who now has no income is, how am I going to pay for my lifestyle? Some combination of cash that I've saved, taxable investments, and maybe retirement accounts. And I sort of, I guess, sidestepped your 59 and a half question. If we're in our 60s, you can access any account without that 10% excise tax, that additional thing that they throw on top of the income tax. Whenever you take a distribution from your 401k, it's taxable at ordinary income rates. If you take it before 59 and a half, unless you have a carve out, there's an extra 10% tax that is assessed. But if you're in your 60s, it's free and clear other than the income tax, and you can take it as needed. But you're going to want to be thinking about what are the different tax buckets you have from which to draw in terms of pre-tax. So pre-tax is like 401k, traditional IRA, 403b, 457. After tax, which is like taxable investment account, or just cash accounts, and then Roth money or tax-free money, which is money that will never be taxed. And all things being equal, that's the money you should leave to your kids because they're going to also never pay income taxes on that. But it requires that you plan appropriately to not be forced to access that money beforehand.
Yeah. So, but Justin, I want to retire at the age of 50. So if I want to retire at the age of 50, then it becomes a little bit of a different ballgame, right?
You're solving a different problem at that point, which is what is between age 50 and 60, what are the tools that you're going to use to provide that floor to cover your expense? And frankly, I mean, if you're 50, you might have a kid who's 20, 18, 16. And what happens to 18-year-old kids? Well, they try to go to institutions of higher learning, and that costs a lot of money too. But if you're lucky enough to have planned for that and or have kids that have hit the lottery in terms of scholarships or whatever, you're looking at a combination of cash accounts, taxable investments, and maybe, people who are thinking this far in advance often will have like real estate or some sort of other, if you've got a handful of single family homes that have a positive net monthly cash flow above and beyond what it costs you to operate those, then that can be income that can also help. And maybe you've got a spouse that's working, and that can be part of the picture too.
Yeah. And I think this is, goes to the point, and I love that we talk about this on the show, right? So like, it's not just about money. Like, what is your goal, right? Is your goal to like stop working and I'm not going to earn any sources of income from anywhere else in the world? I want to be on a beach in Cabo for the rest of my life. Are you no longer working at all? There's no income streams. Is that what we're talking about? Or is it, no, I want to step away from medicine and, kind of take my second journey, and, I want to do something else, and I don't plan on doing it 60 hours a week or maybe even 40 or 30 hours a week. I just want to do like 10 or 15 hours a week. And so I need to figure out how to, like, those are very fundamentally different problems. Like the cold turkey, like I'm not doing anything, and so for me, knowing my personality, at least at the age of 38, like I love being productive. Right. And so I can't imagine a world in which like I'm not spending at least some of my time helping other people or serving a purpose, or like, and that purpose may change. It may be like following my kids around. Like, let's say that like my youngest is in college and she decided that she wanted to go to an art school, and like she's got recitals or whatever, and I want to be able to go to those things, and like, so that becomes part of my purpose. Your purpose is going to change. But if part of your purpose involves something that makes money, fundamentally, that is a different thing and requires different cash requirements than the cold turkey. I'm not working no matter what in any field, occupation, or having any revenue or income stream.
Totally. And another shout out back to the Coast Fire episode. This could also be a time where if you're going to pivot out of medicine, you don't need to continue to make $500,000 a year. You could just cover 50% of your living expenses each year. And then you use your portfolio to cover the delta. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that gets you where you need to go and you can fully fulfill whatever you feel like your purpose is. And you said, I like to be productive. I think you define productive in a certain way right now that is a little RVU heavy. And it may not always be that an RVU heavy definition of the productive life is the one that you hold closest.
Yeah, it's actually been an interesting shift, right? So like we talked about me getting social media and email off my phone. And it really has been a shift from like my purpose being attached to productivity in the sense that, because previously it had been research, it had been patient care, it had been committees, it had been, blog posts and podcasts and writing books, right? The stuff that I do, here at Money Meets Medicine. And more often recently, I find myself cooking dinner for my family and doing the laundry and like going to lunch with my kids at their elementary school and like that defining my purpose. And it's been a very good transition for me. A lot less stress, lot less anxiety. But I'm going to be absolutely lying on this podcast if I say that transition wasn't hard, because for so many years it was like, what's the next step? What's the next accomplishment? What's the next mountain or hill that I'm climbing? And so, it has, I've seen my purpose change, and I have enough wisdom at this point in my life to say, I know that it's going to change multiple times over in the next, 3, 4, 5 decades. But yeah, so Justin, we talked about cash, we talked about taxable brokerage accounts. We talked about kind of this idea of, whatever you want to call it, the glide path or partial fire, kind of cutting back slowly. And then you mentioned one kind of in passing that I think is really cool personally. And I'm kind of a nerd when it comes to this topic, but 457 accounts. So a lot of people don't realize that 457 that, let's say that your employer provides one, mine does. And, you just view it as like an extra 403b or a 401k. In fact, the 457, when you sever from your employer, is immediately accessible without getting hit with this 10% penalty. And so for people that are going to, now there are lots of caveats here that Justin, you and I can go into in terms of like, should you invest in your 457? But that said, let's say that your 457 offers good, distribution options, in terms of how the time period over which you can take it. It's got good investing options. The financial security of your institution is good, so you don't have to worry about them giving your money to creditors because it's not your money until you take it out. Like, let's say it checks all the boxes. Some people might prefer, after they meet their match in their 403b or their 401k, to put additional money into the 457 or to fill up both, because this is an account, if you are planning on retiring early, that you can access without getting hit with a 10% penalty. There's some caveats to this. And so, that said, it is, I think, a neat one to chat about.
I agree. So I just sent you over the link to the IRS website, which has a really helpful comparison between a tax exempt and a governmental 457, which is the fundamental sort of binary type difference between these two. Governmental, and to break it all the way down to the simplest possible terms, governmental is like, it looks more like 403b. You can roll it into stuff, you can take it with you, you don't need to elect a distribution when you leave. And there's really not a good reason. Well, let me say it this way. There's not a distribution related reason to not participate in a governmental 457. The tax exempt 457 is much more fraught. So I would just say, if you're trying to get like the 2-minute version on this, governmental is, in my opinion and observation, way better and more flexible. And the tax exempt should be used in certain circumstances, but you need to understand what the implications are on the back end, because it's great to reduce my taxable income by $22,500 in the current tax year. But if you do that and do that and do that and do that for 4 years, and then you want to leave and take another job, and you're a 38-year-old doctor and you want to take it with you, and the new place doesn't have a tax exempt 457, you may be forced to choose between a couple bad options, the least bad of which may be distribute the whole thing in the year that you leave your job and essentially take the entire sum at the highest possible marginal tax bracket, which would totally defeat the purpose of deferring your taxes along the way to begin with.
Yeah. So actually, this is something that I chat about in the Physician Philosopher's Guide to Personal Finance. And I even have a wonderful graph that I'll put up on the YouTube channel that basically walks you through, like, the considerations and thought process. But basically, one of the arrows is, do you have a governmental 457? And if so, just use it. It's an extra, 401k, 403b. I mean, and so Kristen is a public school teacher. And back when we first started, we used to invest her entire income. And like, I preferentially filled up the governmental 457 over the 401k because she didn't have enough money to max out both. She's a teacher. And so, because of that, I just preferentially put it in the governmental 457. I can roll it over, I can access it in early retirement if she decided to retire early. Like, for me, there was more benefit to that because there wasn't a match. You had a pension. And so it is a cool thing. But anyway, I'll put up right now, if you're watching this on the YouTube video, I'll put up a graph of that and maybe some additional information, including the graph from the IRS website that you just sent me, Justin, because they do have a cool graph on governmental versus non-governmental on that page as well. Or you can download the copy, go to moneymeetsmedicine.com and snag your free copy of the book. But yeah, no, I love this plan if it is appropriate for you. Other things, and we chatted about this very briefly before the show. This is not something that is widely publicized, but it is a tool out there that people could research if you want to learn more about it. It's the Substantial Equal Periodic Payments, SEP. It's not as in a SEP IRA. It's a different kind of SEP, SEPP. And basically this allows you to, over at least a 5-year period, commit to taking the same amount of money out each year. You can't change it for 5 years or until you turn 59 and a half, whichever happens later. But what it does allow you to do is kind of get like an annual sort of paycheck going, for a certain amount of money. And if you do that, you don't get hit with the 10% penalty. And so for some people in the financial independence community that retire early, this is something that you might run across as an option to bridge that gap before the age of 59 and a half. We don't need to like dive into the nitty gritty, into the weeds on this one, but I find it an interesting concept and one that I'm not completely, against. I think it's worth consideration.
I totally agree. And the nice thing about this is if you're avoiding that 10% excise tax, you're also, presumably, if you're not working full time, you're taking a pretty low tax bill on these distributions because you don't have a big W-2 wage. And so it can be an advantageous time to do that. Or perhaps even if you don't need it, essentially do like a Roth conversion, which is sort of it's kind of the same thing from a tax standpoint, except instead of putting it in your checking account, you put it in a Roth IRA and it's never taxed again. You give it to your kids and it's never taxed for them either. So that can be, and that's part of why I say this window between 50 and 70 is so interesting, because whenever that earned income drops down, all of a sudden we can move money between these tax buckets with less tax cost than there has been in the past. A Roth conversion or something like a SEP income stream, when you're making money doesn't usually make sense because you're locking in a pretty high tax rate, or at least you got to consider it more carefully. But if your earned income totally drops away and you're funding your living by working part-time and or using the cash that you saved up and or brokerage account that you've saved up, then there's a lot more options on the table, which is pretty fun.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And so, if you were considering early financial independence, you are nearing early retirement, then, hopefully the show kind of gave you some ways to think through this, whether it's cash reserves or a taxable account or, maybe even a SEP or the 457 partial fire. Like we talked about a variety of topics, but the take home that I want you to have here is you need to do some research, you need to do some planning. Oftentimes a great way to employ a financial advisor to have you kind of sort through this process, because I've mentioned on the show before, Justin, that like for me, like I personally at this point in my career, and I'm learning as we're doing the show together, right, that I'm picking up and learning things from you all the time. So maybe I'm wrong. But I haven't felt the need to have a financial planner. But when we talk about topics like this and like the tax advantaged way, like the tax thoughtful way of, going into retirement and making sure you're minimizing taxes in an efficient way, I can see a multitude of worlds where that very easily pays for the financial advice that you're getting. And I would extend that to the preparation thereof, right? Like preparing for that moment in a tax efficient way. And so I think this is one of the things that people don't think often enough about in terms of like one of the great uses of a financial planner is setting your accounts up and your options up in a way that you can be tax efficient, and then employing that strategy later, which to me is the most complicated topic in all of personal finance. I may be wrong, but like where I'm at right now, it seems that way.
Yeah, this is where good advisors earn their money. And this is one of the places where, when we're working with clients, it's funny. I got an email yesterday from a guy who's like, I'm working with an advisor. He just, the billing hit for last quarter. And on this account, it was $265. And on that account, it was $419. And it feels like this, $692 fee for last quarter was kind of egregiously high. And, that's fine. That I would have a difference of opinion about sort of the longitudinal value and the lumpy times at which it shows up. But in this window, the approaching and immediately following retirement, it's very easy for advisors to come up with ideas that save you well into the six figures and pay for decades worth of fees with one good, well-formed scheme. So it's if you feel overwhelmed, have a conversation with a professional and just see what is out there in terms of the ideas and the strategies that may be a good fit for you.
Yep, couldn't agree more. Well, everybody, hope you enjoyed the show. Please share Money Meets Medicine with your friends, your colleagues, your medical trainees, so that they can learn about this stuff too. And we appreciate you leaving any reviews on iTunes as well. If you want to snag your free copy of the Physician Philosopher's Guide to Personal Finance or get an own occupation disability insurance quote, you can go to moneymeetsmedicine.com or take care of both of those things. We will see you next week. Cheers. Justin Harvey is a certified financial planner at APM Wealth, where he helps anesthesiologists and pain medicine physicians. Dr. Jimmy Turner is a practicing academic anesthesiologist at Wake Forest in North Carolina. He's also a licensed insurance agent. However, neither Justin or Jimmy are your financial planner, investment advisor, or insurance agent. This show is expressly for general education and entertainment purposes only. Nothing should be considered financial advice. All views expressed are solely the views of the guests on the show and do not represent the views or opinions of their employer.